My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today, I'm speaking with Frank Schwartz. He is the founder and president of the Unlocked Man, a leadership development community which guides and equips leaders to remove self-limiting beliefs and connect to their personal purpose in order to fulfill their potential and their organization's mission. He is also currently serving as the president of F3Nation, an international leadership organization for men with about 55,000 members across 46 states and 4 continents. This F3Nation uses vigorous outdoor workouts to teach leadership principles. Frank also founded LEC Media in 2007, a corporate communications and video production firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, which serves clients like Bank of America, Electrolux, Verbatim, Honeywell, and others. He is the husband of his far better half, Tracy, and is the father of 3 wonderful redheaded daughters, ages 18, 16, and 12. And man, as the father of a daughter, I can appreciate how awesome it is to be the father of a daughter, but to have 3, man, that's pretty freaking cool.
It's not for the weak of heart, I will say that.
Now, man, I want to thank you for coming on and having this conversation. It was a little while back where you had me on your show, and by the time I publish this, I'm sure that will be out, and I want everybody to to go to your podcast and like, subscribe, do all that stuff.
Yeah, and vice versa. Let's get my goal here is to make Dave Hollenbach famous. No, I
So, I'm just eager to dig in and learn more about you now that we're on the other side of the mic. So, like, let's start off with where it all began. Where were you born and raised, and like, who were some of your early influences?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So I was born in Virginia, and kind of in the northern part, about an hour out of DC. A little place called Manassas, if you're familiar. Guys who do government work or are in the military, things like that. Typically, if they've been to DC, they've heard of Manassas because it's not too far outside of DC. But so yeah, I kind of was born there and lived there until we were in, like, most of the way through elementary school, I guess, middle school-ish age. Then we moved down to Blacksburg, Virginia, which, if you're a college football fan, that's where the Hokies are from. They haven't been good since Michael Vick, left and then went to jail, but that's neither good nor there. we don't talk about that. So grew up in Blacksburg, and it's just kind of a nice small college town, just a really great place to grow up, safe and quiet and nice, and then bounced around just a little bit, got married, and then found myself here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've lived for the last going on 20 years, I guess, my wife and I. So yeah.
And I'm guessing you went to college and did all that stuff. And
yeah.
Where'd you go to college at?
Yeah, so I went to college there right around where I lived. It was a little college, liberal arts college called Radford University. It used to be the all-girls school that was just down the road, about a half hour from Virginia Tech, which used to be an all-boys school, a military school. And so the joke that I always tell is, because a lot of people like if they live in a college town, they go to that college, right? Or, or someplace nearby, right? And so I always said, well, Radford's where you go when you couldn't get into Virginia Tech, right? So that's why I went to Radford, because I couldn't get in. They were the only ones who would have me. But it turned out it was a great experience, and it was a smaller college at the time. I think there was probably, of course, this is 20 plus 25 almost going on 30 years ago now. I'm old as crap, Dave. But it was probably about 9,000 students, something like that. So pretty small little college, and just a great place to be. And then I studied psychology in undergrad, and then I went back to graduate school and did psychology again, and because I thought I wanted to be a therapist. That's what I was going to do. And finished school, went and got a job in mental health, and then I was like, oh, this is terrible. I am going to hate this here in a few years. So I better find something else to do. And one of the things I had done, this was way back when computer video editing was really brand new. I mean, it just was, just a couple of years into this thing. And so when I was in graduate school, I kind of discovered that, and decided, well, maybe I'll just go get a job in a, TV station or something like that. Right. And so I managed to do that, and moved out to Utah, is where I got a job. And partially my motivation for going to Utah was I had met my wife, and that's where she lived. So that seemed like a reasonable thing to do. We were one of the very first success stories, I think, because again, this is 20 going on 22 years now almost of marriage. And we were one of the very first success stories of online dating. Right. This was like dial-up dating. Like it was seriously old school, Dave. I'm telling you. And but we met each other that way, and
what was it? Love it, AOL?
You could pretty much, right? Yeah. Right. AOLconnections.com. Actually, no. So we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And so it was actually called LDS Singles, like Latter-day Saints Singles.com. And it's just so, like, at the time it was so weird. Her mom was convinced, of course, I'm an axe murderer, who's gonna just murder all her whole family because she met me online, and I'm some kind of weird creep and everything. And now it's like, that's where, I can't remember what the number was. It's like 60% of relationships start online now, some ridiculous number like that. And but back in the day, it was unheard of. So yeah, so I met her, moved out to Utah, and got a job at the TV station there. And then after a little while, I was like, you know what, I think I'm destined for bigger things. And so we jumped down to Atlanta area for a little while, and I worked for a little TV station down there, and then didn't like that very much. Atlanta was kind of a tough spot we just didn't like it very much. It was just too big, and too much going on. And we'd both grown up in pretty small towns, and so liked the idea of a city, but that was too big of a city. So Charlotte was just a random, no particular reason. We don't have family here. We have no reason to be in Charlotte. But truth be told, we were flying back. We were living in Utah at the time, and flying back to see my folks in the Blacksburg area. And you can't fly directly into Blacksburg on a big plane, because the Roanoke Airport is about probably 500 yards long or something. I mean, it's just this tiny little airport. So we laid over in Charlotte to switch planes, and both of us were sitting in Charlotte waiting for our flight, and both of us were like, wait a minute, Charlotte looks really nice. And if you've never been to Charlotte, there's nothing to see out by the airport. I don't know what we were looking at that we thought Charlotte was so nice, like we were just like, maybe we could live in Charlotte. And they were like, that was a weird thing to think together at the same time. And so we kind of tucked it back there. But then when Atlanta became, not interesting anymore, we just sort of ditched it and said, hey, let's just go to Charlotte now. And so I found a job in Charlotte and worked there for a couple of years. And then after that, I sort of said, hey, I'm easily as smart as anybody here. I'm just going to start my own thing, and jumped out. And that was about, I guess, 15, 16 years ago now. And just sort of, been building ever since, and having a reasonable amount of fun. There's always ups and downs when you work for yourself, right? Yeah. But the ups have been pretty good. So that's what we've been able to do. All our kids were born here, and one of them's the oldest one's now headed off to college, and we're starting to look at what's the next chapter. What's next for us. So I guess we'll figure it out as we go. But That's kind of the high level of where I came from and how I got here.
I'm curious because we didn't discuss this before. The 43 feet podcast.
Hmm.
When did that begin?
No, that's okay. That's a very good question. So somewhere around, I guess it was like end of 2014, somewhere in like the late fall, I think it was, of 2014, I stumbled, like a lot of guys have, across this group called F3. And at that time, it was, I guess, about 3 years old, or just over 3 years old, and I went to my doctor, and she was like, "Look, here's the deal. You're really fat, and you got high blood pressure, you got high cholesterol, you got sleep apnea." And she goes, "Look, you refuse to exercise. You're basically a stroke waiting to happen. Like that's your next step, is either a heart attack or a stroke." And she's like, "I think it's most likely a stroke." And I was like, "Oh, good." So I won't even, so I'll be disabled. I won't even be like if I drop dead, my wife will be rich. So at least I got that going for me. If I'm disabled, I'm screwed. Like there's nothing good. So I was like, all right. I guess I better do something, because I'm not a big fan of medicine. Not that I'm against medicine, but just, I think that medicine is designed to treat symptoms. Typically, it's not necessarily designed to treat causes. And so I thought, okay, well, I can do some things to handle the causes of this, which is, I could exercise, I could eat better, I could do a lot of things. Right. So that was about 50 pounds ago, 40, 50 pounds, somewhere in there. And so I started going to the gym and stuff. And I just kept hearing about this F3 thing, F3. And I was like, what is this? And there's a guy that worked for me, and he started losing weight. And so I just asked him, and I was like, bro, okay, what are you doing? I'm on this kind of trying to figure out how to get, thinner and more healthy. Like, what are you doing? And he was like, well, I'm doing this F3 thing. And I was like, all right, fine. Go to the stupid F3. I keep hearing about it. Fine. And so I just showed up on one Saturday, I spent the time working out with these guys, and it was pretty vigorous outdoor boot camp. And it was, I remember being extremely cold that day. And I didn't have gloves because I'm an idiot. I've never worked out outside. Like, what what the heck is this? Right. I didn't have the right, gear, cold weather wise, to be out there, because F3 is always outdoors. Right. I mean, that's one of the core principles. And so, work out, some guy gives me a pair of gloves, another guy's like, you need a hat. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're so stupid, so get a hat, get some gloves, and work out with these guys. And then, we can get into it here in a minute, but I tell you what, at the end of the workout, there's, we always participate in something. It's one of our core principles. If you don't do this, it doesn't count. It's not an F3 workout, right? Is that we end in what we call a circle of trust. And in that circle of trust, you you have an opportunity. It's kind of just like an open forum for guys to share whatever's on their heart, whatever struggle they might be going through. They can ask for prayer for something if they're inclined to do that, and say, hey, like, and a good example that I think of is, we've heard everything from, my kid committed suicide, I'm recovering, alcoholic, all the way down to, I lost my job, or I'm just having struggles with my wife, or whatever the thing might be. Right. And we don't, it ain't therapy. Right. So we're not necessarily diving in deep and trying to unpack, what's wrong with you, but it is a place for a guy to share, and then to get some support. And guys lean in, I mean, they really take that stuff seriously, and they're like, hey man, let's go grab coffee. Inevitably, you'll raise your hand and you'll say, hey, I'm having trouble, because I feel like I'm gonna fall off the wagon. Well, I guarantee you, there's at least two other guys at any given day, they're like, oh yeah, I'm an alcoholic. I'll, have you been going to meetings? Who's your sponsor? That kind of stuff, right? And just a way for men to support each other. And after that experience of being in this circle with these guys and then praying with them, because where we are, it's a, fairly Christian part of the country, and so they prayed a Christian prayer at the end, because that's a typical, kind of takes on the flavor of wherever it is. But that's what they did. And I was like, whoa, like, this is different. There's something very different about how this is, this brotherhood of guys. Like, it just was a very different kind of thing. And I was like, man, all right, so fine, F3, okay. So I started just, showing up once a week, or whatever, and because it was cold, I didn't want to go out in the cold. That's crazy talk, right? And then after a little while, I was like, I think I'm going to cancel my gym membership and start just going there, 4 days a week or whatever it is, right? And so that's kind of what happened. And then to bore you with the long details and the weird and strange and twisted story of, you know, how it ended up being that I met the founder and we ended up in the same place and spent a weekend together. And I mean, just like literally my face hurt by the end of the weekend because we were laughing so hard all weekend. I mean, the guy's hilarious. And we just had a very similar, you know, sense of humor, a very similar look on the world, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, become friends. And he says, "Hey, look, I've had this idea for a while of doing a podcast, and like an F3 podcast. And we would talk about like, you know, leadership philosophy and all this kind of stuff. Cause, you know, F3 is, yeah, it's a workout group, but it's really a leadership group. And we'll dive into that in a second too. But yeah, so we sort of, he was like, have you ever done one of those before? And I was like, no, this is like 3-4 years ago, right? So podcasting wasn't quite as big and, you know, and popular as it is now. I mean, it was definitely gained some steam, but it wasn't, you know, like the joke is now, like every, you know, if you don't have a podcast, what are you even doing, right? You know, really, everybody has a podcast, right? It's so easy to do now, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't have any idea how to do this, but I'll figure it out, right? So, you know, we cobbled together some equipment and start doing this podcast, and that was, like I said, you know, whatever that was, 3-4 years ago or more now. I don't even know. But a couple hundred episodes, and, you know, just a lot of fun to do. But it's really a way for us to sort of spread the culture and the leadership philosophy of F3, to the men who are in F3, but also to hopefully, you know, a little bit broader audience as well. So it was just sort of like a random, you know, I didn't have any plan. Like I remember very clearly the first time we sat down to do an episode, there was no bumper music. There was nothing professional. And I was like, hey, I hit record. So guess what? Let's start talking, you know, and we just, blah, you know, an hour goes by and we're like, well, that was fun. Okay. Shut it. I don't know. You know, what do we do now? I post it. Okay, great. You know, so we had no idea what we were doing, but yeah, it's kind of evolved from there. So.
Okay, so what does 43 feet represent?
So one of the other things that, and at some point I'll dive in here in a second, just give you kind of the whole, like, what is F3 and why are, you know, this craziness that we do and what are we really talking about here? But the number 43 is arbitrarily significant, right? It's, you know, Dave had this idea that as a leader, you really only get so much good road ahead of you. You know, you're hacking away at the trees and trying to clear a path for men behind you if you're the leader, right? You don't get the luxury necessarily of, you know, well-groomed, you know, paved path toward, you know, the goal, right? Like if you're really leading, you're in the underbrush, man. Like that's just the way it is. So it was like kind of that idea of like, you know, you're always just a little bit ahead and just a little bit ahead, and you're the one hacking away at the stuff to try and get men to come behind you, right? And one of the other things that we do at the end of the workout is we always, and I don't know how this evolved exactly, other than the fact that it was kind of fun to hear, but we give these idiot nicknames, right? Everybody in F3, if you come to an F3 workout and participate, you know, you get a new name, you get a nickname. And so, like, you know, there's a lot of guys that are firefighters, not a lot, but, you know, a number of guys that are firefighters that are in F3. And, you know, we would look at something and, you know, so as you can imagine, you know, there's a couple of backdrafts out there, right? You know, right? You know, that kind of thing, right? You know, fire plug, you know, this kind of stuff, right? You go, okay, great. All right, thanks. You know, so they'll name you something stupid, but part of that tradition and that enculturation at the end is you say your name, you say your age, and then you say your F3 name, right? And so what Dave noticed was like, you know, Dave Hollenbach, 43, and his F3 name, you know, Frank Schwartz, 43, whatever, right? And so you sort of notice that, like, kind of the median age of guys coming out and sort of dealing with this part of their life was like 43 was kind of that, and, you know, average-ish age. And so that was, he just sort of picked that out of the sky, noticing that as a pattern, you know, and said, okay, let's call it 43 feet. And I was like, that sounds reasonable to me. So yeah. I'd love to say that we had more intentionality behind these things. In fact, I'd love to say we had more intentionality behind a lot of things that we do in F3, but mostly it's a lot
the
of
43 tenets, the 43
yeah,
maxims of
right.
F3.
Yeah, nope, not a chance, right? No. It usually is we bumped into something, we thought it sounded funny or cool, and then, or we noticed that it worked, and so we adopt it, and we sort of there's a concept that Dave came up with, and actually he's working on a book and releasing it here soon, called zebra jockeying. And so the idea is that, Dave, if you're getting ready to head to town, right, and you want to ride a horse into town, but a zebra comes out of the barn, I'd probably hop on that zebra, biggin. Like I wouldn't make a lot of worry about waiting for a horse. If the zebra comes out and head in the right direction, great, I'll ride that. So, we're very much an adapt and, take and just sort of adopt and adapt, I guess, in a lot of ways, right? We figure out what works, what doesn't work. We bump into stuff. Dave's blog is even called the collision learner, right? We say, we collision learn. That's how we do things around here. And we don't, going to a classroom doesn't necessarily work all the time. It's not going to teach you everything you need to know. Usually the best teacher is failure. So we try to create a lot of space where guys can go out and try stuff and get dirty and bump into things and fail and pick it up and try a different way. And, that kind of stuff, because that's kind of what we're about, is helping men to go on this leadership journey, in their lives, right? And that could be in their home, in their work, or wherever it might be. But we believe men should be leaders everywhere. So we wanted to have a place where they can try stuff out.
Yeah, man, that's huge, and it's so applicable to this podcast, because this was born out of my collision, my crash and burn from embers to excellence. It's like the best lessons that I've learned in my life were they came out of huge screw ups.
Usually excruciating pain of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, before I go any further, one thing that I want to point out for the people listening, and they're not actually watching on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, they can't see you. So, like, you're extremely fit.
Okay, I do my best, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you said that you were overweight,
yeah,
like you've done some work.
A lot.
So, just how tall are you? How much did you weigh? How much do you weigh now?
Yeah, so I'm about 5'10", and which for the first 2 years of my marriage, I had to say I was 5'11" because my wife is 5'11", and so she really didn't like the idea of me being shorter than her, so I had to lie. Now that she's okay with it, I tell the truth, right? So I'm 5'10", so about 5'10", and I weighed myself this morning. I was about 195, 196, something like that. But at my height, I was just shy of 250. Is about where I was, about 245, 246 in there. And I remember, when it started to become real to me, yes, my doctor, told me, hey, you're fat, you need to do something, right? But also I started noticing little things like I'm breathing heavy walking upstairs to my bedroom. Like, not like wheezing, but like, I'm like, how do I didn't even run up the stairs. Like, I just walked up the stairs. Like, that's bad. And I remember sitting down in the car one time, and I leaned my arm on my stomach, and I was like, oh hell, we got a problem. Like, this is not good. I should not be able to do this, right? And so I was like, okay, maybe I've gained a couple pounds. Like, that's fine. Maybe I've gained a couple pounds, and sure, it happens, right? You're married and whatever, blah, 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 right? And I have a little brother. He's 3 years younger than I am, but he's of course he's up for his light colonel, and he's out there in Fayetteville in the Army, and he's super fit. I mean, and he's I'm gonna guess, I think he's 6'1" or 6'2". He's probably about 230, but he's not. I mean, he's a monster. He's a big boy. Yeah. And so people, and his name's John, right? And so people used to, when we were kids, they used to think we were twins, because he was taller and I was shorter, and so, even though we were 3 years apart, people thought we were twins. So we look a lot alike, like a lot alike. So one of the things that really hurt my feelings was somebody, he told me later, he was like, yeah, my friends used to call you Fluffy John. I was like, okay, all right. So I was fat. I get it, right? I got it, right? So yeah. That's where I'm at. So 5'10", and now, like I said, just shy of 200 pounds. And look, this is another thing. I'm 47 years old, and cut it however you like. Metabolism ain't what it used to be. And so I kind of have settled in here. I had this dream once of being like, I could be 185 and lean and fit, and just a monster, and I was like, my gosh, you don't realize until you get, in your later 40s and you're like, it's really hard. Like I would have to make some drastic lifestyle changes. And so then I started thinking about like, what am I really doing this for? Am I doing this to look good at the beach? I mean, that's a nice, side benefit, right? I mean, that's great. Am I doing this so that my wife thinks I'm sexy? That doesn't hurt either, right? But what I'm really doing is, I'm doing this to prolong my life, to have better quality of life. And really, ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason that I participate in any kind of fitness is because I believe that my job as a man is to be extremely useful, to be as useful as humanly possible. And no offense to anybody, which usually means you're about to say something offensive, but like if you're fat and sitting around on the couch, like what good are you? I mean, you might be able to think things and do things. That's great. But when the power goes out and your neighbor needs to move, or when, whatever the tragedy or the just, whatever it might be, or, difficult thing that comes up, like what good are you? Sorry, you're just not. Like if you're an undisciplined man who cannot keep his body in some state of physical fitness, you got a real problem. Now in F3, right? Fitness is the first F. So we focus a lot on fitness, but that's just because it's the thing that brings us together so that we can have the other two F's, which is fellowship and faith, right? So we have this fitness component. And I joked with somebody just last week on a podcast. I said, look, if knitting was the thing that brought us together, Dave, then we would knit, right? But it's not. Fitness is the thing that brings us together. That's the thing that men want. And we recognize that this is a critical piece of being a man, is being physically fit and doing things where we work our bodies. So, it helps us to clear our minds. It helps us to be more disciplined and better men. And so, I do this so that I can be useful in these other areas, and we push ourselves pretty hard in that fitness arena. A lot of times that's part of why, we make it free. That's our, first core principle, is that it's free, because we want every man to have it. So we try and lower that barrier of entry so that it's, no excuses. I don't want to hear about, well, I can't afford the gym. Can you afford to walk out of your house? Because that's where it is. It's the park across from, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's in a public place. Like that's where we work out, and so we always make it free. The other barrier is some guys go, well, this just isn't really my kind of group of people or something like that. No, man, it is open to all men. That's our second core principle. No matter what, we don't care who you are. We don't care what you look like. We don't care what your job is. We don't care what your sordid past may be. In fact, we've had guys come and say, hey, look, I have a felony. Like, do you think I'll be welcome? And we're like, nobody's going to ask. We don't give a crap. You plan on stealing stuff out of our cars while we're working out? Well, no, man, that's crazy. Okay. Like, what do you want from me? Like, come, of course, come. This is a place of rehabilitation, brother. This is a place where you come to be you. We take you with all your warts and all your, baggage and whatever else. And we don't care. It doesn't mean anything. Are you willing to do the burpees? That's what we care about. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you're the guy who finishes first, are you going to circle back and help the last guy? That's what we care about. We don't care about any other stuff. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Whoever you were is uninteresting to us. We're interested in who you are and who you are to become. Those are the things we're interested in. And so part of that too is to make sure that we always do those workouts outside. And guys are like, what about the guys in Minnesota? Well, I'll tell you about the guys in Minnesota. There could be 2 feet of snow on the ground. They don't care. Well, what about the guys in Chicago? It gets pretty windy and nasty in there. Yeah, they love it. I don't know what they're made of down there, but those, like the guys in Naperville and, and some of these surrounding places where we have, big chapters of F3, these guys eat it up. I don't know. I'm like, bro, if I see snow, ugh, I mean, I'll go out on it. That's fine. But ugh, I live in the Carolinas for a reason, I don't like that stuff. I don't do that, I don't mind going out in the cold. I don't mind that thing. But if it was like cold and snowy every day, oh, forget it. I'd be miserable. But those guys eat it up, man. They're monsters. So, but it builds our durability. It builds that mental toughness and that physical toughness that we need to survive as men. In fact, I'll tell you this, we did a thing here where I am a few weeks ago, and we're like, hey, you know what might be fun? Let's try and carry our body weight for a mile. and let's see how quickly we can do it. Let's say we can do it in less than 23 minutes. So we gave ourselves this time frame. So I load up, 200 pounds, a couple of rucks and a big sandbag and all this kind of stuff, and make an attempt to walk a mile in, 20-ish minutes. And a lot of guys failed, and a good number of guys managed to do it. But we look at that and we go, now we know, right? Practically speaking, this is practical fitness to me. Practically speaking, if I had to, Dave, I know we've only met over Zoom, so I can only presume, but I'm looking at you. I'm guessing you're probably about 5'10", 5'11", somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe a little taller.
Yeah, I'm 6 foot even.
Okay.
Weigh
What's your
205.
205? There you go. I was say about 2'5", 210. Yeah. So I know without any hesitation, if I was called upon to pull Dave Hollenbach from a burning wreck, hoist him on my back, and run 100 yards to get him to safety, wouldn't bother me a bit. I know for 100% absolute fact that I could do that easily. And if I had to carry him a mile to the hospital, it would take me 20 minutes. So it wouldn't be fun, but we get him there, like if there was no other way to do it. Now, look, is that going to come up? Probably not. But preparedness is a fundamental tenet of leadership, I think, and that's our job. As men, that's what we're supposed to do. Our mission in F3, that we focus on that fitness, fellowship, and faith, because we want to plant, serve, and grow these small men's workout groups in order to invigorate male community leadership. We just see a hole there. We see a place where men are not called upon to step up in this society. They're called upon to shrink and to go away and to effeminize and to disappear if possible. I mean, that seems to be the society's desire for us, in a lot of ways. And I say society, and I don't mean like the actual people that we know, because I don't know anybody who, like not very many people that I know are like that, that want that. They want people to be whoever they are, right? But there seems to be a large contingent, and they're usually the vocal minority, who are saying, no, men are toxic, men are terrible, let's get rid of them, right? And we're saying we're not toxic, and there are toxic men. There's no question. There's toxic women too, right? There are toxic people. But being a man, being masculine, and serving your surroundings, serving your community, serving your family, taking care and protecting, those things that you love, it's not toxic. That's just your job, right? So our fourth core principle then is that we rotate men through leadership. It's all peer led. There's no professionals. There's no, no. In fact, I'm not paid to do this job as president of F3. Nobody's getting a salary to do this, because it has to be. It's the level of a movement. It's not a business, right? We sell some T-shirts and make a couple bucks here and there on T-shirts, and so that's how we fund things like travel and pay the lawyers and accountants and all that kind of stuff. We have to figure out all those things that we do, but generally speaking, it's a self-funded, and it's real lean, and it's mostly volunteers, and but that's the belief that we have, is that men need to be elevated back into their rightful spots alongside their wives as leaders in our communities, and so that's what we're trying to do.
Nice, man. I want to circle back to the first question about your early influences. Wondering what your mom and dad did. I mean, what were you grew up in kind of a small community? I mean, were you close to your grandparents? I mean, you've got one brother?
Yeah, I got one brother and 4 sisters. Yeah.
So, they played a role in
Sure.
who you are today. Like, I'm just curious, in those formative years, and then in the years following, where you learned a lot of valuable lessons, like who you are today can be looked at as a direct result of people that you interacted with, people that you looked up to, people that you wanted to emulate. And I would imagine that, quite a few of those are in your family.
Yeah. And thank you for circling me back. One other thing about me is the ADD is strong, Dave. I'll just end up nowhere if I'm not careful, right? So thank you for circling me back there. So yeah, again, born and raised for part of the time up in Northern Virginia, then a little bit in Southern Virginia. And Virginia is a wonderful state. I mean, I love it. It's beautiful, rolling Appalachian mountains. And I mean, just a fantastic place to be. And so I am number 3 in my family. So my dad was married so my 2 older sisters are from a previous marriage of my dad. His wife unfortunately passed away. And so he had 2 daughters at that time. Then he married my mom, and she had 4 kids on the tail end of that. So my 2 older sisters, were from that marriage, and then I've got my brothers right after me, and then there were 2 younger sisters who kind of finished up the line there. And we grew up. My dad was an oral surgeon, and so he did pretty well for himself. And he so we had boats, and we grew up on a lake and had all kinds cars and nice big houses, and went to private school. And that's kind of how we were raised. And as a kid, you don't know, you know you don't know anything. You're just oh, I thought this was what everybody did, right? And so we were well taken care of. We were well provided for. And once you get a little bit older and you start seeing and understanding the differences between you and your friends a little bit more, you're like, oh, so not everybody does live like this. And so that probably caused a little bit of spoiled bratness, in me, right? Early on. But that's the way life goes, right? Sometimes that happens. But my dad he was in the military. He served in toward the tail end of Vietnam. And he was a dentist, thankfully, so he didn't have to go and be kind of frontline stuff. But he worked and helped reconstruct faces and all that kind of stuff for guys when they came through. So that was kind of what he did. But and so you might imagine, especially that generation. My dad is now, let's see, this is 22, so he's 85. So he's a little bit older. So he's 85 years old. So that generation of guys, coming through the military. He grew up in a rough neighborhood in Baltimore, Maryland, and kind of the projects a little bit, and so he was kind of a rough and severe dude. I think he did his best to kind of calm it down once he got had kids and stuff. But he's pretty strict dude, and it was tough to relate. And he and I conflicted and butted heads a lot. And when I was younger, especially high school and college, because you're trying to be your own person or whatever. And because of that, and he was pretty rough on everybody in the house. And sometimes got escalated, and that's without getting too, you always got to be careful what you say about your parents when they're still alive, because they could hear this, right? So, I don't want to. Yeah, he's a good man. I love him. But it was tough. It was a rough growing up sometimes. That's just the nature of how it was. And my mom was very much a kind of she was very much a go with the flow. So she was kind of a path of least resistance. Like, she wasn't gonna get involved too much and make it matter, because then she'd have to deal with it and whatever, right? So we lived that kind of life. And I was pretty close with my siblings for the most part. But growing up in a tough situation like that, and kind of a lot of I always joke and say my dad was the kind of guy that if you gave him $1,000, he'd look at it and go, "What, you only had 50s?" It was kind of that. It didn't matter how you get, like, that's just the way it was. And you just kind of go, that's Doc. And now I can look at it and go, it's just a feature. That's just how he is, and that's okay. Like, I'm not mad at him for it. At the time, though, when you're a kid, though, man, I tell you, boy, it was a lot of resentment and a lot of anger and that kind of stuff growing up toward him and toward how we were raised. And so with all of that kind of baked in there, when I'm growing up and trying to raise my own family, I was saying, like, what can I do to not do that? So there's influences early. The joke we tell a lot is you can either be a good example or a hideous warning, like, you pick, right? And so, I had some, what I consider to be warnings, but I also, from church and other places like that, had some really good examples of what I thought, a man and a parent and a father should be, and that kind of thing. So, you're able to kind of divine it out. and figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work, and what you do and don't want to do, and things along those lines, right? But so certainly there was an influence there in understanding and deciding kind of what man I wanted to be and how I wanted to raise my family. Now, my dad taught me hard work. I mean, there was no question. And he taught me things like, quit is a 4-letter word, like that's right. And that's just not something that we do around here. We're Schwartzmen. That's not what we do. Right. So there's a lot of good things that were, it's funny because it's influential in both ways. Right. Oh, you have, some of these weird hangups about your self-worth. Okay, well, that came from, oh, well, but here's these great things that, you wouldn't have learned that if it hadn't, been so severe. So you go, see, it's just kind of a mixed bag, right? We just, be grateful for all of it.
On that note, just real
Yeah.
quick, because I
Yeah.
had this epiphany today. 3 words, both are true. So most things in our life, there's black and white, yes, no, positive, negative, yin and yang. There's even our strengths come with weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are looking at the value of something or looking at, maybe a past mistake, how do we define that? Because it's our choice. Both are true until you decide.
Mm. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. In fact, even after you decide, both still might be true. You just, are choosing one over the other, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that. And that's exactly it, right? So you can, one of the things I said to some guys in a group that I lead, a week or two ago, I said, you can look at these things, that these events in life. My belief is that events are neutral. They have no intrinsic value on their own. The event itself is just a series of facts. This is just stuff that happened. And so whether it was a good thing or a bad thing or a whatever is entirely up to how you choose to perceive it, right? And how you choose to navigate through it. And so I said, look, I think you can either look at events in life as things that happen to you, or you can look at them as things that were given to you. And I'm trying hard to choose the latter, and say, no, this was given to me for some reason. I grew up this way, or these things happened to me, or, I almost went out of business in 2016. Like I thought it was over. I thought we were going to go bankrupt. I thought it was over. And and I can look at that and go, well, that happened to me. And these are all the bad people that did these things to me. And this is all the bad situation that happened to me. Or I'm trying to choose and look and say, no, there were things that I needed to learn. There were things that I needed to change about myself. There were ways that I needed to parent differently and be different. I wouldn't have found F3 if I had stayed as I was, So really that near business failure and that kind of crash to the bottom, and that recognition that I'm fat and I'm out of shape and I'm undisciplined, and this is part of why I'm having these big troubles at work and, in my business and all that kind of stuff, like that was given to me. And because of that, now I'm able to say, okay, I can make choices to rectify that, now I can be more successful in business. I can choose to do these things different. But if I looked at everything as I'm the victim and, oh, this happened to me, I ain't gonna break out of that, man. It's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
As you matured and
Relatively.
became more refined, I
Sure.
guess.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Yeah.
So there are other influences that, maybe men in your life, women in your life, maybe you look at your wife as somebody that helped you develop uh, better as a man, like maybe shined a light some of those areas that you were blind to, and
Mm-hmm.
there are people in our lives that come and go. They add the value while they're there, and then they're gone. There's people that are with us our entire life, some that come and stay with us for the rest of our life.
Mm-hmm.
But each person plays a role, and there are some that are more significant than others. And I feel like, without knowing you too deeply, like I get a sense that you are the kind of man that wants to be a significant person, someone that wants to be significant in other people's lives because of the value that you bring and you add to them. And to me, that's what a leader is. That's really how you can develop as a better leader, when you can have that mindset of I'm adding value and this is how I'm doing it. And I'm wondering what you attribute that to. Is it somebody, multiple somebodies, or was there an event in your life where you're like, was it that almost failure of your business?
That's a good question. And so I would say, and I'll name some of them because I think it's worthwhile, right? There were some guys early on, high school, college kind of time when I was, my head was firmly planted in my rear end, and I was running around like an idiot. Um, but there was a guy named D. Whittier who was, he was a ecclesiastical leader and a scout leader at different times and stuff in my church. And he's the only guy that I can think of. I shouldn't say the only guy, but one of the only guys that I can think of that looked at my dad even and was like, "No, nah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy." Because my dad would be pretty severe, and he'll try and keep you on the outside. He doesn't like opening up. I mean, he's still to this day. It's not true, but he still claims I've never cried in my life. And you're like, okay, yeah, sure thing, Dad. Like I've been there for several, but that's okay. It's not important. Not important. Right? But that's his mentality, right? I don't cry. That's nothing, right? But he was a guy who, even though my dad would try and keep him out, he liked my dad and would hang out, and he would try and be his friend. And he was super influential. He and his wife both were super influential on me because they had kids my age, and so I was friends with one of their sons. We would kind of hang out a little bit, and again, I would see him at church all the time, and I always looked at them and said, "That's a couple that clearly gets it." Look at the fruit here. Like, these kids are good kids. Like, these guys get it. And so I would look all the time and be like, all right, how do I incorporate more of that into my life? How do I be more of that kind of man? There was another guy, Blair Meldrum, same kind of thing, right? Who just was, one of those guys that would listen. When you're having some real trouble or some different things, going on, he's one of those guys that would just see it. And he'd be like, "Why don't you come talk to me? Why don't you?" And there these guys that just saw the potential of what was there. Cause I was an okay kid, and gregarious and fun and, whatever, but clearly, directionless, just lost out
Yeah.
there. And so these men like that who would lean in and say, "Hey, I see something here, and we're gonna try and get this kid directed in the right direction, rather than living this life that he's living." And I'd say that probably the biggest influence and the biggest change, well, yes, that was super influential. Yes, the near failure of my business was very influential on changing who I am. Dave Redding, the founder of F3, after we became friends and he became a mentor and a good friend, he has and continues to be hugely influential. Probably, I mean, almost more so than just about anybody else growing up. He's poured a lot into me and spent a lot of time, making me a better man. And I've had great privilege, in fact, I'll just tell you, like, it's ridiculous. And a lot of it comes out of F3. Just this morning, a guy he's a 3-star general in the Air Force. He pinged me, and on my, texted me, and he was like, "Hey man," because we had a meeting for F3 a couple weeks ago, and he was like, "Yeah, I noticed something. I wanted, just maybe we can get a call. Like, would you give me a call?" And I was like, "Sure." So, we get on a Zoom, and here's this guy, retired, 3 stars, and clearly an influential dude. Like, you don't get an audience with guys like that very often. Like, that's just
Yeah.
not a thing. You don't just walk up to one and be like, "Hey, I got a question," right? And he has chosen now, and he said, "Hey, I want to tell you a couple stories from my, when I was, under my command, like, and things that I did and choices that I had to make," because he had heard, he heard me and saw the struggle, that I'm trying to have here as I'm explaining some things, decisions that we made in the organization and whatever. And so, these guys that will take this time and just pour in, right? So these are, and his name's Ralph Jodis. His F3 name is Red Baron, because he was in the Air Force, right? It's idiot nicknames, I told you. But and just these hugely influential guys that I'm able to bump into now. And you said my wife, and you're absolutely right, Dave. I would be nothing without my wife. It is comical what a just a trash panda I would be without. It would just be terrible, because she is, and I say some of it's just her personality, and maybe it's something we've developed together over time too, but she is the most supportive person alive. She puts up with so much and is just joyous and fine with it. Doesn't matter. I mean, I joke all the time, and it is a joke, although, who knows, right? There's some truth in there. But if I said, "Hey, honey," and came home and I said, "Honey, I've prayed about it, I've thought about it, and I think that we need to live in a box under a bridge as our next phase." I joke and say she would look at me and go, "Well, do you think we can get 2 boxes?" Like that would just like that would be the big question. There wouldn't be any, because that's just how much she believes in me. And I'm like, "Honey, I don't know what happened to you. But as soon as you figure out what you've done, like this relationship's over. It's gonna be terrible. I'm gonna hate it." No, but but seriously, like that's how she sees the world, man. I don't know why she believes in me the way she does, but she does. And it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. I'm able to take risks that I would not normally be able to make. I'm able to be creative in how we solve problems because she'll support it. And we have become, I feel like, over the 20 plus years now of marriage, I feel like we've become a very strong team in how we raise our girls and the way that we, approach our lives and how we serve our communities and in our church and all that kind of stuff. It would not only be almost impossible to do without her, but it would not be worth doing without, if not for her.
That's beautiful, man. You've got 3 daughters. One's going away to college. The other 2 are right on her heels. If you never got another chance to talk to them, what is the lessons that you would like them to really hold on to as what you gave them?
Dave, do you know something about my trip home that I should also be aware of? No. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Fortunately, because of my faith, and that's, you talk about something that influences, boy, that is a huge, as I imagine it is in most men's lives, right? But that's a huge influence on how I act and what I do, and my journey in kind of coming to faith and becoming a true, what I consider to be a true believer of Jesus Christ and his Father, and how that all works, the gospel and all that kind of stuff. Like that's been just tremendous, and so many examples of men, and women who are influential and within that organization, that confine. But yeah, as part of that faith, we've been taught and encouraged to do certain kinds of things, like since the time they were kids. I mean, like little. We've always read scriptures together every night, and we've always prayed together every night. And not just over meals, like just, legit, like we keep a running list of people that we know that need prayer, and we do that together as a family. We set aside Monday nights typically as a time for just family. There's nothing else going on. We won't go anywhere else. We don't have friends over. We don't go to other friends' houses. We've just reserved that as family time. And so we've been able to share a lot with our kids, so thankfully, I hope anyway, you never know, right? But my hope is that we've told them this stuff and taught them this stuff all along. And so it wouldn't be like they have to have one of those horrible moments of like, I was reading my dad's journal and then I was like, oh, that's what, right? Like, hopefully they've heard it, over and over and over and over. So the things I would want them to know as far as like a life lesson. I mean, naturally you want your kids know that you love them and you tell them all the time, hopefully, and all that kind of stuff. Right. So hopefully they get that, they got that, right. They figured that out. As far as like life lesson kind of stuff, I would probably say that, and we've already kind of talked about it a little bit on this podcast, right? Is that remember that events are neutral and that you have the power to make them what you want, You have the power to choose what it is that you get out of something. Life doesn't happen to you. It's something that you've been given. And so if you can, I think that's for me right now, especially because that's just something that has been on my mind a lot lately as I've worked with different guys. But to me, that's a powerful differentiation. And if you can live your life understanding that things don't happen to you, you happen to things. That's what you were created for. That's why you're here. You go out and happen to things. They don't come and happen to you. You're a thing to act, not to be acted on. If they can really get that in their heart and in their mind, I think that influences their decision making. I think that influences, the kind of people they hang around. I think, that kind of thing would influence that growth mindset is, a thing that I think that would influence them tremendously forever, because it has for me, so I think that's the lesson I wanted to hopefully have. I'd be interested to hear what they say though. What do you think is the lesson that your dad gave you? And they would probably tell some bad dad joke or something. You'd be like, that's all we remember from him, right? So, yeah.
Man, but I really enjoyed this conversation with you, and just like on your show, I love talking to you. And I'm sure that the people listening to this want to know more about F3 and want to know more about you, because
Sure.
we covered a lot, but you know you're much deeper well than what we've dug into here. So um,
There's no
just
guarantee that that's true, but I guess this may be it. Yeah.
well, people I'm sure could get a sense of who you are by listening to your podcast,
Sure.
listening to the questions that you ask and how you respond to those answers, and then you know if people want to work out or follow you on social media, or just
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what's the best
So
way to connect with you?
yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, so if you want to learn more about F3, just go to F3Nation. That's F the number 3 nation.com. And you can find, there's a map there that has, workouts, all the workouts that we know of are mapped on on there, and you can get in there and find one near you. And the nice thing about F3 is, again, since it's free, and we're not collecting dues or membership, registrations or anything. Like, just show up. That's it. Just go to whatever park or high school, parking lot or whatever, whatever it might be that's near your house, man, and just show up. So yeah, f3nation.com. You can learn about that there. And as far as me, if you want to find me, if you're a Twitter guy or gal, you can go to, this is my idiot F3 nickname. So now I'm revealing the thing, right? But it's Dark Helmet F3. So it's at Dark Helmet F3. And if you wanted to find me on, I guess on Insta, I'm at The Unlocked Leader. I don't really do a lot of Insta, but my name is Frank Schwartz. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty obvious if you did like a Frank Schwartz Charlotte. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one, because Frank isn't exactly what you call a popular name, right? At least in the under 70 crowd.
You just mentioned the unlocked man, and we didn't even talk about it. Like, can you tell me?
Yeah, it's kind of a little side project, little hustle, if you will, and really just really quick to kind of give you a high level. What I have found is that the reason, I believe anyway, the reason that most men struggle in their lives is they have not got a purpose. They have not identified their personal purpose, and they say things like, "Oh, well, my purpose is to help people." Yeah, yes, no kidding. That's everyone's purpose, right? That is the universal purpose that every human being on the planet shares together, is to help other people. But you personally, individually, have some role to play there, and some purpose for which you have been placed here, because you have a specific set of talents and abilities that you have been given. They're different than mine. There's guys who like things like, I hear these things called spreadsheets. They like those. I don't even put one in front of me. I don't even understand what that is. I don't want to hear about it. Apparently there's details out there. I don't know what those are. I'm not interested. Don't talk to me about that. So I believe that every man has a personal purpose, and that his job is to try and divine what that is, to uncover it, to get past those self-limiting beliefs and that BS story that he tells himself every day about who he is, and change those things so that he can move forward and start living on purpose, like really truly for what he was created to do. Because I'm telling you, the times that I do that, and thankfully, F3 is perfectly aligned, with my personal purpose, right? Which we talked about when we started, but yeah, so that's what the Unlocked Man is. If you go to theunlockedman.com, you can find me there too. So, it's an online community. It's free as well. You can join me on Zoom calls on Friday, and we talk about personal purpose and how we kind of try to figure it out and get there. So, yep,
Awesome.
that's what that's all about. Yep.
Well, I'll have links in the show notes. So all you listening out there, check it out, like, subscribe, and follow them on social media. Confident you'll love 43 Feet podcasts, and
Especially the Dave Hollenbach episode.
yeah, you want to check that one out.
Really good. Yeah.
Man, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
brother.
really appreciate it, man.
Same. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform, and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.